Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Bay Area Content Marketing Meetup. We've been meeting a lot this year about AI, and today is no different. Today, we are talking advanced AI tips for content marketing and leveraging AI agents. With us is Tyler Koblasa and Corey Severns.
Yeah.
Excuse me. They are with a company called OrcaruAI, and they're going to explore how to use AI agents to match writing styles, repurpose long-form content from videos and podcasts. They're also going to compare AI platforms, OpenAI, Google, Gemini, and Claude. You'll get real-world examples and hands-on tips, and Tyler and Corey will demonstrate how to leverage AI for more efficient, high-quality content creation while keeping audience engagement at the forefront. Tyler and Corey, take it away.
All right. Well, awesome. Can everyone hear me okay?
I can.
Cool. All right. Awesome. So Corey's also here. I think I was going to intro Corey, but if any other questions, he'll be in chat here. But well, awesome. Well, good to connect. And I'm sure all of us are seeing just high level, as AI literally week by week is changing and new models being shipped, new features. We keep hearing about generative from generative AI to now GEO. And all of us are obviously using AI in many different workflows. Let me go ahead and share my screen here. But
Sorry,
so throughout
my
going,
computer's having a meltdown right now. I apologize.
Okay, we'll see you in a second. But yeah, so we'd love to kind of like have a conversation on these different kind of workflows that we're working through, and then as we're going, just like throw questions in the chat or interrupt, because I think the goal is to use the time to like have a conversation where we can all learn from each other. We've kind of gone through different pieces that we're going to run through, and then really kind of open it up to spend a good amount of the time like talking about like, okay, how are we each like week by week? And I'm sure there's golden nuggets that across everyone on the call that we could voice and learn from each other. But let me go ahead and share my screen here. I'm going to keep it in just the not full screen if it's not too hard to read, just to make it easier to navigate. But my name is Tyler Koblasa, founder, CEO at Orcaru. And just my quick background here. I've been working in technology for about 25 years, since kind of Web 1.0. So as a kind of serial founder, whether that be founding on the software SaaS side to acquiring, growing, Orcaru kind of came to be most recently from a company we had first acquired kind of in a small private equity group where we were charged with growing that business and ultimately kind of spinning it out to be venture backed. And that business, a large part of it was inbound demand generation or effectively content marketing. And just to kind of cheat, just to kind of go through as far as background, this company called Cloud App, we had acquired the business, grew it about 20x, 300x the valuation. And then through that process, it was all about content, right? And just knowing that content's king. Now, as AI is evolving today, does a blog post matter as much? We're even wondering, is it everything just regurgitated the AI content? So today we're going to go through kind of leveraging AI agents and these concepts you hear about, larger context windows or projects, the pros, cons of the different LLMs. Also, really, I think what's most important is how do we get original content from the subject matter expert into AI? So we're going to go through the concepts of like converting podcasts or webinars into long form content, as well as how do you start to train an agent to really write in your style. So kind of looking at, obviously we're all using, kind of just even like show of hands if you have video, like if you're using GPT-4, and then maybe also if you're using Claude, like how many of us are even starting to experiment with the different LLMs? And we'll talk about why they're important as far as the differences. So Claude, the most recent version from literally like 2 weeks ago, released October 22nd. When you start to compare it, even if you're using GPT-4 or 4.0, it's night and day. And you're like, well, I thought 4 was good, 4.0 was good. So first, kind of thinking about like, where is this evolution? Where is AI fitting in marketing workflows, right? So traditionally, when we discussed or thought about content marketing, you'd have either in-house full-time writers, part-time writers, or pay per post, where you might hand someone that project, say, produce this piece of content, or your copywriter. So we're going to run through looking at how do you start to pull together these concepts of what is an AI agent? How do I actually write with some contextual knowledge, potentially in the same voice and tone of an existing writer? These concepts of large context windows, which are present in OpenAI GPT-4 as well as Claude. Getting into like being able to match your writing style. So like the voice tone of like, that's the biggest issue is like, well, I can't use AI because it sounds like AI, right? So how do you start to even train it off of that voice tone or even one individual writer where you could literally have a ghostwriter that writes like Gary Vee? And I think the most important part here is just like, we don't want more regurgitated AI knowledge. And that's literally like, now we're just polluting every piece of AI content. So I'm guessing, folks, if you really have had that experience around, more AI, like it's like, does a blog post even matter when it's more regurgitated content that's already been published? So the point being, where do we really leverage the years or decades of authentic original expertise from a subject matter expert, pull that into AI? So it's, whatever that insight is coming from that individual person. And then looking at where does AI work great today and where is a human absolutely critically important, from the initial outline, the knowledge, the quotes, the information, the statistics, whatever those customer stories or kind of expert kind of perspectives might be. Where does a human fit in the editing process? And then finally, how in the kind of future of content really does AI even write in the words of, a certain type of maybe authoritative writer or author? So real quick, if anyone either in chat or just kind of raising your hand real quick, like if you're familiar with, or you've heard of like the Google EAT about like, expertise, authority, trust, either just mention yes in chat or could raise your hand. And kind of the point being about like, it's important to present expertise and authority in the content that we publish, whether that's on a blog post or let's say in any type of social media type share, or to a newsletter, or that a customer is gonna read.
Dennis, nice. I EAT 3 times a day. Well, that's good. It's super important.
So what are the different kind of pros and cons of like looking at these different models even today? So OpenAI, GPT-4 and 4.0, great for general content creation. You can fine tune it. You can load up these large, what are called the context windows. And a context window, just imagine if this is like pages of a book or, existing PDFs or even transcripts. Now, on the cons, it doesn't really let you understand and tweak and know what's going on behind the hood. Google Gemini, as far as like the quality of writing, it's got lots of other kind of interesting features, like, more functionality around with its AI. You can directly process video. Like, you don't have to go to transcribe it or pull these different sources together. The cons, if you also look at the different scoreboards, its style and its scoring, it has some limitations. And then finally, like Claude is really just in the recent, weeks, definitely the last, recent weeks and months, started to build an even higher quality of voice and tone. So we're starting to see very precise instruction handling, and being able to still provide a large context. When we say context, like here's 500 pages of, all your ebooks or whatever that might be. So there's a number of leaderboards also, if anyone's not familiar, that are tracking these models against different types of criteria. But as far as the kind of scoring of the leaderboards, as well as on different kind of parameters based off like coding. So even parts of Orcaru, our platform, and multiple of the different software engineering projects, if your teams aren't using AI in coding today, like they're completely missing. Like you could be moving 80% faster. Tools like Visual Studio and a company called Cursor integrate directly with the latest model of Claude, 3.5 Sonnet. And you can literally pick which model you're using on a coding basis. And then if you think about the same thing, well, what about when I'm writing? So if I'm writing long form content, if I'm writing ebooks, newsletters, so I'll stop
Bob,
there.
what's interesting.
Yeah, or go for it.
Sorry, Tyler. What I was going to say is I see Bob in the chat. It's interesting because OpenAI 01 did not seem to come up when Tyler and I went through. Like these leaderboards were pretty. So I don't know if like all the ones we saw weren't tracking.
So,
but yeah.
so Corey, first of all, I think what you've provided is a good summary across the board of the different operating systems. but it's a small fraction, or it's only a subset of what businesses look at. For example, with 4.0, you have access to Python. So it's been fine-tuned for mathematics. You can do all of these functions that aren't available, including analyzing data, visualization, that sort of thing, that are just not available elsewhere. But my comment about O1 is we're just focused on content marketing, essentially using language and communicating and so forth in terms of a process flow. There's nothing out there from other language models that you list that can do what O1 can do. And so much so that OpenAI is going to bring this to full release. So far, it's in a preview mode. I'll stay away getting technical about it, but it's very, very powerful in the marketing content flow when you want to use source knowledge and get into deep reasoning analysis. That's the only reason I bring it up.
Awesome. Yeah, and I think the thinking is like you're stating here. We have there's going to be a new model every we're to be able to keep track of all of them, right? How at what rate? Obviously, we have O1, we have Claude, and we have the different training, the deep kind of technology within them. And then there's what's the layer for, if any of us, we're all marketers, we're all operators, we're growing our business, we're generating leads. So how do we use these different models and where do they fit? So yeah, 100% agree.
So I'm just trying to, let's separate out, and I'll quiet down. Lead generation from content marketing flow.
Mm-hmm.
You won't see O1 in these leaderboards, and the reason is it's focused on reasoning, which is one of the 16 tasks within their architecture. And I'll try to stay away from the technical detail. But the reason for bringing up and spending any time on it is from a marketing point, given the content flow, given the focus on using the author's original knowledge. If you want to get deeper insights, it's a good tool in the toolbox. Very, very good tool.
Awesome. Well, we'd love to chat more on how you're using O1 and what's the methods and how you're thinking about it. So I think that's what's interesting is there's these little tweaks to the workflows that everyone's kind of figuring out that's working really well for them, and it's how do they get synthesized. And
the other piece of the puzzle too is it's not a direct one-to-one either. You can't use the same prompts in Claude, let's say, and go move them to O1 and try to use them there. I think the reason maybe to even leave it off a bit, Bob, and not to say that was intentional, but we've certainly done our testing with O1, and I think we found the latest model that Claude actually outperformed at least what we were for our particular
with our prompts, let's say. Yeah. So and I think that's the tricky part is you've got a workflow, you've got prompts that then work differently with different models, and then even with the different technical features within, let's say, O1, 4.0, where do you use each of these pieces? And then what's way too technical and how does this apply to all of us on the call, right? It's okay, day-to-day is we've got a team of writers, whether we're doing long-form content, newsletters, if we have a podcast or we do webinars. So kind of coming back to customizing content. So one kind of example we'll go through just to show kind of how easy that is this whole kind of point around what is an AI agent, an AI kind of author. And it's really, how can that specific kind of a brain, that AI agent, literally put Corey's name on it or Dennis's name on it, that it writes whatever we put out historically, or if we're a well-published author that writes for Forbes or writes for CIO magazine or travel magazine, how can I even think about my voice and tone? If it's going to write on my name, I'd love to be able to have to do less editing, right? Let's save time. So if I'm guessing everyone's, spends a lot of the time in GPT, ChatGPT, and or Gemini, maybe also Claude. So we're going to go through just a quick example here with Claude as far as being able to think about the voice and the tone and the concept of projects. So if we open up Claude, with any type of Claude Pro account, you get this concept of a project. And a project within Claude, you have the ability to simply upload any form of large pieces of content. So this could be a PDF. It could be just literally you went to 10 blog posts, save them, download them, exported those to PDF. And I have 3 or 4 writing samples now. As simple as that the ability to effectively take that existing content, drop it into that project and to create that context. You could load up 1, 2, you could load up 30 of them. Ideally, if you're trying to use the knowledge you can think about it one way. If you're trying to use the actual writing style and tone and to analyze that, that's that other ability. So with that project knowledge, you provide some custom instructions. So in this case, we're going to tell Claude, you're a writer named Amy that writes in the same style, voice, tone, language as example articles provided in this project. Each sample is a PDF, export a kind of printed version of that sample article. And some of the instructions like ignore any of the other kind of formatting that might be in that PDF, because this is just an export off that page. And with that in mind, now you've got this kind of framing of what to do with that information. Anyone, I'm kind of curious, just to kind of who's used projects either in some form on Claude or on OpenAI. I'm just kind of curious, just if anyone wants to jump on or throw a question in chat or.
Haven't tried projects yet. Yeah, it's kind of the next evolution in the sense. I'm curious to see if anyone's used it in anything outside like GPT maybe, but Claude is pretty simple in terms of UI and being able to understand how to. Yeah, exactly, Karen. Claude is phenomenal at being able to understand how to add these assets and work with them all together.
And it's really, I mean, this is right out the gate. You log in, now you have this context, right? Now with that context in place, just like if you were on, within ChatGPT, I want to go through, I have now this kind of instruction set that's writing on behalf of that type of that writing style. Now, this is obviously a very basic prompt, and everything goes in as we're talking about prompt engineering. Kind of coming up with that method to kind of provide that framework. So I mean, that's that. Let me jump down to so effectively, if we jump back to another example here, we've provided some instructions. Now we end up with that kind of drafted piece. And then finally that would end up in, whatever our workflow is, getting brought into, let's say, a Google Doc, which now an editor and or that initial author writer would be able to work with it. So basically the equivalent, if you look at ChatGPT, it has these context windows. The context window within ChatGPT, as well as Claude makes it easier to access and use, just less technical, I would say. It's very user-friendly. So definitely I would try giving that a go if you're already an active using GPT for any kind of content writing.
But to alley to your question, I would say I don't think at least from what I found, I don't know where there is a project or any collection thing like that in GPT, and at least not from your standard, Tyler, unless I'm missing something.
Yeah, it's layered in a bit. It's not going to be just upload 4 PDFs in the same kind of UI and workflow. But kind of looking at
LLM is a good one. Yep.
Yeah, so Notebook LLM, and looking at what are these different layers that can provide context that interact with the API directly, so that you don't have to be manually going into, let's say, Claude or GPT-4. And then one other kind of example we're going to kind of run through as far as kind of training and providing the goal here is, how do you get more original content that, in this case, that writing and that it's the source information from this example is still leveraging, this is an AI model and AI information, but just keep in mind that context window, rather than say, write me an article, it's like, use everything I provided you with these facts, this Gartner report, any of that very, very detailed, just like you can provide, just think your prompts per se can literally be, like the context you're providing can be hundreds of pages. So the next kind of example, as far as kind of moving from the concept of context windows and projects, we're going to go through creating more original content, not just using AI models. Because what we don't want, any of us, is to be reading, sharing, producing more regurgitated AI noise on the internet. And I think we all probably are having that thought around every image we see, every piece of what we read. And I think the point about GEO, like, really, like, where is the blog post even going to be important in the future? So how do we put the spotlight on original information? Meaning, if I'm sitting next, if I want to sit down and interview Dennis and hear, as far as the different businesses, marketing roles, and hear like your firsthand kind of nuggets on your workflows, your perspective, your playbooks, like that experience is priceless, right? And how do we, as marketers and demand generation, and in this field, how do we bring more of that original content, which is obviously where webinars and podcasts, whether you're interviewing a customer, maybe the different members on your management team, maybe your CIO, maybe engineering leaders that have information on that specific new feature and so on. So we're going to go through another example of taking a transcript from a podcast, or you could just replace it, let's say a webinar, and then producing a piece of content off it. And many of us at this point have had to do this, or we're already kind of done that. We've like dabbled in it, or we've thought about it. But yeah, quick, I don't know if anyone is on wants to throw in a chat or just verbally mention, like, has anyone here had the need, or you guys produce or manage part of your team's podcasts or webinars, and you've had to turn those webinars that happen every week into a post that goes on the website, and then maybe some social content? Has anybody had to?
Ali says yes.
Yep.
Ali, I'd be curious. Yep, Karen, done manually, not AI done.
Yeah, we used to, back in the old days, which means what, a year ago, send the transcripts out to a transcriptionist, and then Zoom and no, Goldcast. Sorry, we're using Goldcast. They built some of that into the platform natively, so we were getting transcripts right out of Goldcast, and I didn't get a chance to test them, but they also just rolled out some new features that let you like create clips, repurpose it into a blog post, a bunch of that stuff you can do right in the web. And I'd imagine other webinar platforms probably have some similar stuff.
That's a good point. Like you said, the old days last year, at this point, I feel like everything is probably tossing AI into it, and I'd be curious to see what their output really, like how people, if anyone's used any of those, like how do you feel about the transcribing capabilities even of the AI tools? Like I use Notebook LLM, and I think it's okay, but I think Otter kind of kills it at this point, doing very well. If anyone else has any other thoughts on transcribing stuff they use, or
Hi, I am actually full-time content creator, but I was exploring using this script, like it's like a text-based video editing, but still haven't pulled the trigger. Just saw some bad stuff on Reddit about it, but like there's one of my idol, like who's a big creator, like she recommends it to her audience, which includes me. So just I don't know, but like the Premiere, like Adobe Premiere, like the text-based edit really clunky. So I just haven't seen something that's like really synced up, that doesn't freeze and all that stuff. But yeah, for now I'm just using Adobe. Like the latest version has like text-based editing, but it's really clunky. Like sometimes when you try to press backspace, it doesn't actually delete the part of where you're talking. The text links up to the video part where you're talking. So yeah, haven't found something that's like perfect. Yeah.
Yep.
for how much you pay for Premiere? That's ridiculous, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Bob and Ali both mentioned, so, for one option, Mac Whisper, you're saying to go straight text transcription. So thinking about, you have any type of audio source, whether that's literally like you're sitting here next to a fellow colleague and one of the managers in the company, the VP, and just grabbing these voice memos as raw, like kind of conversation, or it's a meeting, right? So it's obviously it's a Zoom meeting, whether you're using Fathom, Fireflies, Otter to transcribe the meeting. But just thinking about these as very rich, like this has the transcript, right? And if everything is transcribed, now we have original content. We don't have regurgitated, like more AI, whatever that is. So how can we make it really easy and for our teams to get that firsthand insight and knowledge from that subject matter expert, maybe that customer, maybe that manager, or just whoever that thought leader is that's been in the space for decades, right? And how do we kind of find those golden, make it really easy to pull that out rather than like this kind of back and forth process. So today, we might have a transcription from whether that be Fathom, from Fireflies, from Otter, maybe from Zoom, or we might have an MP4 file. So we might just have the raw video. So in some cases where you do have that raw video, yes, you need to take the MP4, separate the audio out, run it through a service like Otter to pull out the transcription. Then you also have to get that, like most transcriptions, when they come out of the box, they're pretty like a raw transcription isn't very readable. So that has to get cleaned up for readability. Obviously, AI does that really great. And then with that in mind, it's like, okay, now how do I actually turn that into something useful, right? So if you have two people on a podcast, if you have two people on a call, or you're just interviewing said customer, user, subject matter expert, the first thing we need to know in that transcription is like, who are the speakers? Who is that person, right? What's the bio, the bio details on the different voices that are on that call or that presentation or that podcast, and how do I provide it as much kind of relevant background to the speakers and what that call or that show might be about. And then finally, you have a lot of these calls that might have of a 30-minute recording. 10 minutes is like personal catching up. It's really not related personal information about the two individuals on that are in that webinar. So it could be like we had one example with a client that this is a Series B, a B2B company, and their webinars, they sometimes this specific show or this episode had the first quarter of the call of talking about the background, just stuff that was very personal and it was just chatter. So how do we remove that chatter and then still put the spotlight on the valuable insights that are coming from that conversation? So once you have that transcription and you have that raw whatever's kind of coming out of the transcription, next is like, how do I actually turn that into a useful piece of content? And obviously that comes back to you whether that be in Claude or whether that be in OpenAI or ChatGPT or Jasper, any tool that you might use, copy and pasting these large blocks of text in to then end up with a piece of content which is insightful and provides value around it. So yeah, and then thinking about what are the two different ways to actually provide that original kind of context and content that you're writing about. So we talked a little bit about recording, kind of internal kind of company expertise. Talked about repurposing podcasts or webinars into blog posts, and then finally that any of those long form posts, ideally they're turned into 5-10 LinkedIn shares or other types of social shares to drive traffic to that post. And alternatively, we can look at whether that's the context, the information, the source material is a recording, or it's 2 or 3 reference URLs, or it's a PDF. Like, we're providing context to write about. And then we talked about earlier, and now we're talking about how do we write in that tone that brand or that author would write in. So I'll stop there for a second, but just any like kind of questions on just like that, the concept of transcriptions, using them as a source material or other reference URLs or PDFs as source materials, just so we're not creating more AI regurgitated common knowledge. But any kind of thoughts or reactions on how we're how everyone's doing it today and what's working well? And
so Tyler, I'll add a couple of comments here. First of all, I very much align with some of your early thoughts with regard to getting the source material, high quality source and not just regurgitation of hallucinated information kind of thing. So I think that's important in all domains of content. I use a few of the products that were mentioned here. Zoom AI, I use the script, and as I mentioned earlier, Mac Whisper. In terms of quality, just raw quality, Mac Whisper probably does the best, at least from my perspective, that it's exceeded the script and Zoom, both from just raw text. But unless you use the API and you're a software engineer, you don't know the speakers. For that case, I actually found, to Jerry's comment earlier, the script actually does very well. So they've got a feature that allows you to identify the speakers, and I've used that in business. I'll take a call I have, take the MP3 from the Zoom video, I'll put that into the script, and I'll have it put the speakers when I have like a one-on-one with another speaker. And I've used that. And to your point earlier about getting eliminated the initial personal chat stuff. I'll use that when I go back to have follow-on discussions with regard to action items and so forth. What I have not done that you are alluding to here is repurposing them. So other than business engagement discussions. So I haven't turned them into blogs or social posts and so forth. So I'm interested in that. But that's my experience on those three tools that were discussed.
Awesome.
Another one, Fathom.video, Slack. A lot of interesting transcription software.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been going the opposite direction, so it's take it as what it is. Like, so because my original content starts from the text, and I repurpose it into video, then chop it up into short form because I'm multi-platform, and obviously more distribution is better. But I think the challenge is you have to learn how these different social media platform work in terms of what like engages and what, and like I'm still trying to figure out like whether, like, say if I do a LinkedIn post, do I do the call to action? Like to my understanding, some of these platforms, if you have the URL in the first part of your thing, right, it hurts your engagement and views, right? So like, but the problem is also all these platforms are constantly changing how they are architected. So Twitter now has these like allows, I'm obviously a premium member because I'm a creator, and but there's no automation tool that you can schedule these long form like posts yet. Like, so you can only still do whatever the original Twitter limit is, and so all these things means like on the, yeah, I guess this is all total digression now, but like on the video side is yeah, there's different sets of challenges if you go from the text to video. But if you're, I guess, in a corporate environment, you're constantly bouncing ideas back and forth and repurpose that as text. It seems that the technology problems are like, yeah, because all these like Otter.ai, which I've heard of Otter.ai, these like video to text transcription seems like an easier use case that's been solved pretty well. But yeah, other than that, yeah, I think yeah, there's a lot of operating leverage to once you have the thought behind to get as to maximize your reach via like long to short repurposing. Yeah, I think that's my takeaway. Yeah.
Awesome. Anyone else on how you're kind of repurposing content, or just like how can you make it as frictionless as possible to get new source material that your teams can be, again, like customer stories, insights from internal team members, executives that don't have time to sit down and write a post. Yeah, no, any other comments on that?
Well, we've used it for a client to write like a 2,000-word blog post as the first draft, right? You get it started, and then it gets turned back to the client to edit and make other adjustments to it to make sure it's on brand. And I'm just creating a presentation for them right now, and we're ranking #2 for a great search phrase that brings that up in Perplexity and Google search, organic search, and OpenAI when you ask for citations. So it's hitting all those places, and the heavy lifting was done initially using OpenAI and Claude.
Do you have any tools that you're tracking your, or I don't even know if these exist, or as far as your GEO, which is, I think, literally like as your, like, as we're talking about this, because I mean, people, you know, you've got Ahrefs, SEMrush that teams used or used to use for normal SEO, but even how you're tracking if AI is referencing your content and your brand or your voice is kind of coming up in.
So I use Chat Hub, but it's not the best tool. There's a tool that's out right now called Rank Brain, and there's another great one coming out that I've seen, and I think it's called Revere. But these are going to be expensive platforms, but from I've seen the output, and they're pretty darn great. The problem is, even though you know what the sentiment is and all of that, you don't know that what you're actually doing to optimize is actually going to make that a change because things are slow, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, it's literally kind of the next evolution of, are people reading blog posts anymore? Or is it all just coming from, they're sitting on their Gemini or their GPT talking to themselves all the, or if they're reading up on this new, let's say, infrastructure observability, solution, or a, RevOps need, or and like how we're learning effectively.
Well, Google came out earlier this year and said that AI overviews are built to only show information that is backed up by top web results. So even though we didn't think we were going to need to still do things like blog posts and rank well in SEO, there's a lot of commonality between doing, optimization for language models and for traditional search.
Yep. So then if that comes back to the whole, when with Google Search Grader PDF that's published, if anyone isn't familiar with it or referencing it, it's a 100 or 200 page PDF Google publishes on how they search grade and how things get indexed. But you can also kind of sum it up to they've spoke about, and if you're not familiar with the Google EAT, the expertise, experience, authority, and the trust. Like, who's publishing that? Who's the brand publishing it? Who's the author byline? What are the quotes, the comments, the citations? Like, how is this? What's going to cause us to rank besides like stuffing a bunch of keywords, playing with semantic keywords, or lots of backlinks, or whatever that might be? Obviously, those are important, but just how do you provide as much authority to that content? And then how do you associate your content, your brand, with authorities and names that have been writing about this topic, or led other companies, or have that bio that's sitting in the background?
So a big thing I believe that's going to need to happen next year and onward is that we're going to have to spend more time doing PR and other avenues that get our content out onto other websites, because and they have to be authority websites, right? So that when the LLMs have that in their training or searching, they're going to see that. I should show you this one slide. So let me see if I can just make a screenshot of this, and if it's big enough. So this is showing, let's see if I can put this in here. Oh, I guess I can't put an image in here. Can I not?
You can show your screen if Tyler gives you
yeah, here, go for
access.
it. Yeah.
Okay, let me just do this.
I need to.
So what I'm going to show you as soon as I find the share button, and it says that it's waiting for a request from you, Dennis.
Yep, should be good now.
Okay, so this is looking at the data sources that shape LLMs. So of course you have the common crawl and
Rosemary, we don't see it yet.
You don't see it yet? Okay,
Not,
so sorry about that. Let's see.
no worries.
Okay, do you see my screen yet?
We do.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So this is showing the top data sources for LLMs. So of course, there's no surprise, the common crawl that went everywhere, right? And Wikipedia. But then when you look at these other sources, these are the authority sites out there, right? McKinsey, LinkedIn, Forrester. So we have to find ways to get out to Substack and these other sites to make sure that we can be an authoritative source. Okay, I'll give that back to you.
Awesome.
Quick question, Rosemary. Was that just for authoritative sources broadly, or for like marketing specifically?
Well, I didn't add marketing to it, but I got a lot of marketing resources in there.
Yeah.
But then it also showed Bain and McKinsey and Harvard and all these other places. But remember, right up at the top is Substack and Medium. So they're placing a lot of importance there. But you're right. I was surprised to see so many of these sites being marketing focused.
Right.
And I'll turn it back to you, Tyler.
Yep. Let me jump back to there. Okay, let me know if this is coming through. All right, and I believe this is the right, I'll link you guys to this as well, I'll throw it in chat. But you can kind of look up the search evaluator guidelines. This is a 170-page doc from Google that starts to get into the Google Eat kind of concepts. But it's really, you know, if you read this whole document or you trained AI off it, or AI was already trained off of this, like you have that foundation of knowledge. But I'm gonna throw this, I will triple check this is the right latest version, but I'm 99% sure this is the search grader. If you just search up, okay. So then kind of coming back to, you know, what is our current, like, what's a content production process today? So obviously, you know, a team strategizes, you come up with, all right, we've got this vision, we're going to interview these folks, we're going to write all these topic pillar clusters, we're going to hit these competitor, you know, we're going to do our, you know, SEO research, or we're going to look at trending keywords that are kind of going, you know, up, becoming more popular or less. And then as we're kind of thinking about what terms, once we've kind of got that kind of content calendar, it could be we have a team that's producing, you know, X number of articles a week per month. And that's a mixture of, you know, maybe newsjacking related new topics that are hitting the news that we can comment on as a brand. Or we can bring kind of insights around new other kind of like thought leadership pieces that are coming from other industry experts that we can kind of feature and associate with our brand. And as Rosemary was mentioning, how do we get that content get published elsewhere, any form of almost like a guest post on behalf of the CEO on another site that's speaking about that topic. So you kind of build that plan wherever that original content's gonna have to get produced. Then you've got to figure out, how do I source the information? With that's like, I'm interviewing subject matter experts, and then I write a post. Then I have to think about the actual kind of drafting of that content, whether this is for our newsletter or for long form articles or how-tos or facts, or, you know, whatever it is that we might want to be providing on our platform. We have to then write the article, which is commonly, you know, you end up with some sort of outline that has certain kind of tidbits in there, maybe pieces that we don't want to miss. Someone's going to write the piece, edit it, maybe obviously that's a combination of maybe one of us or our team members, or a writer on our team. We assign that piece of content, they come back with that, whether they're full-time in-house or we're paying per post, you know, which commonly, you know, as far as how that's kind of outsourced and scaled. Then that gets edited by our editor. And then potentially, if we want to make sure we get the most kind of on-page kind of SEO juice out of that. So it passes all the score on-page technical SEO kind of scoring. If we care about that, or we use any of these tools like Phrase or Surfer SEO to make sure that it has the right words on it and that it's related to the other top articles that are ranking. So if we're going to invest in it, we're going to get the most kind of bang for a buck as a company or a team. And then finally, how do I, again, any of that content, I'm going to figure out, who's publishing it? If this is going on our blog or the different parts of our blog, where is that going to fall as far as who's the actual author byline? Does it say by X, or does it say, you know, contributor or reviewed by? Because everything at this point, how much is AI? And if it is AI, next, is there a plagiarism issue? Does it have to go through an AI checker, right? So we have all these kind of issues around kind of how we think about it. So that content creation process is obviously moving very fast from 2 years ago to today. I mean, there was Jasper, then there was GPT, then GPT-4. Now we've got all sorts of whatever's going on. Now we're thinking, where does the human fit? Where does an expert fit? How do I manage this? So that's kind of been what we've been thinking about over the last year with Orca, is looking at like, all right, well, any of the brands that we're working with, in-house companies, you know, we have to go through that writing, that content production pipeline. How do we go from concepts, ideas, topics into long form content? And then maybe the other way around. How do I go from a well-written research long form article into a number of social posts or some sort of video? But Yeah, so that's kind of the areas that we've been thinking about. So we've basically taken a lot of these playbooks and built a platform UI around that, and then layered in the humans, like so that you have human kind of editors, and then industry experts as far as being able to make other updates to that content. And then looked at, all right, as we train kind of AI, how do we really start to like to this point right now, as far as if you're building any technology company, like the speed at which you can add features or adjustments to these playbooks and workflows is it's never been faster. And that's because the engineering teams now, like if they're not moving faster or your team hasn't laid off the team members, like there's something wrong, because it's definitely the complexity and the sophistication of the coding abilities. You can move very fast. So yeah, I mean, I think we talked a little bit. There was one question about Claude versus like, GPT-4. What we've seen, yep, go for it. Well, I think Connie, you've got background.
Sorry.
No worries. But yeah, just someone was asking about GPT versus Claude versus Gemini. So Claude, as far as the actual, it basically, it sounds less like AI. And yes, you can tweak and adjust. And I think as we were talking about earlier with the new GPT, I think O1, yes, there's abilities to tweak that even further. But out of the box, if you have to produce any written content right now, like Claude is, and its latest models are scoring, and also the quality of what we've seen, and the ease of getting stuff that doesn't sound like AI and less kind of not a delusion. What's our where you're coming up with fake content? Hallucination. Yeah. But yeah, so I guess anyone else is using Claude today, or they're using multiple LLMs, or are you using Jasper? What tools are you guys using in your, if any of you or your team has to manage content, like how are you guys thinking about that process today? And so we have a GPT perplexity.
So Tyler, I'll just comment on that article that I started for the client, and it was a technical product. So I used all three LLMs, Perplexity to get citations and sources and quotes, and Claude, which did a great job when I already had content. But for using ChatGPT, the great thing about that was I could load in competitor URLs to help me come up with topics and subtopics. And then you put all that together in the two different LLMs, and you really get a great outline of your topics, your keywords, your subtopics, the order, the flow. It took me a whole day to do my part, but in 2 months, we have these fantastic results.
Yep. Amazing. And that's ultimately we're not here to talk about the Orcaru product and what we're doing. I'm happy to explain or offline or talk more about it, but that's the general philosophy is, all right, you have a topic, a concept, you need to write, you have one or multiple reference URLs, inspiration URLs. You might want to just crawl the web in real time to actually learn about, these are the top ranking posts, or these are the top ranking URLs or videos on this topic. What's inside of that topic? Okay, you can manually go read all of those, and a lot of the LLMs directly. You can't say just go read these 5-10 URLs and write me or whatever. So we basically will crawl in real time, read all of them, build this real time knowledge base of every detail, and then use that to draft a very detailed outline, which we then write up and then hand to a human editor, and then a publisher, and then an author. But so we're effectively taking that same thought process, Rosemary, that you mentioned. It's like, okay, how do we write code around it? It's not that hard. But ultimately, like the hard part is the playbook and the context windows. And rather than having copy and paste tons of prompts, how do we do that? But I know we have about 5 minutes, and anyone have some specific kind of like questions around other what's working well for them, or
I have a question. Oh, go ahead, Rosemary.
No, go ahead, Dennis.
Oh, well, first I'll note Tyler and Corey's email is on the slide on the screen right now. So if you have questions on their platform, feel free to get in touch with them. My question is, I was wondering if anyone has done, I'll just call this daisy chaining, where you take the LLMs, you have one produce, let's say, a draft, you give that to another LLM to critique, and you take that and give it to another, and then you go back to the original and say, what do you think about this? Has anyone tried that?
Yeah.
Interesting.
So we've done some testing with that to see how is it going to catch issues that a normal editor or stakeholders be like, that's not supposed to be there. Here are the rules of this, whether that's the brand or some sort of guideline. And can you make sure that the AI is actually following it? And then can you have another AI, like you said, different LLM check it? Which is interesting on the coding side. You're having Claude write code, and then if it can't fix the bug, GPT-4o is reading all the code, and those two are literally editing if they can.
Cool.
Nice, Rosemary. Yep. But well, awesome. Yeah. If there's not any other questions, we're definitely game for if there's any way we could be helpful, kind of sounding board on these processes. And then if anyone is up for kind of sharing how you're thinking about your playbook today. Like we've built a playbook into like the OrcaruAI platform, but it's more just, it's a playbook, it's an SOP, it's a process. Really around how do we swap notes and then think about like playbooks and then where's the future of this? Because if we just think about everyone on the call right now, like on the call or 1 degree away, there's a pretty standard playbook. And then you have to think about, well, does that apply to enterprise? Is that straight B2B? Is that consumer? And then where does that fit on the content side? And then how much of this, if we're thinking about, social media or other channel like PR, how are we getting published and bringing our brand and any kind of perspective into another audience? But
well, Tyler and Corey, thanks for joining us and sharing your expertise. Thanks everyone for joining us here. And we think we have 2 more Zooms for the rest of 2024. So check our meetup page. And if you want to give a talk next year, get in touch with me as well. Awesome. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks so much, guys.
Thanks a lot,
Right.
Tyler.
Cheers.
A lot
Thanks.
of insights.
Yeah.
I like